Hi everyone and welcome to a new video on the CBI channel. In this tutorial series we're building a full stack application using Python Django as our backend and React.js as the frontend. This is not the first video of this tutorial series. We've already had 5 or 6 videos previous to this. We've already set up our Django backend and our React.js frontend. We've used React Router and created a beautifully looking navigation menu using components from Material UI. And we also did our first video on creating, reading, updating, and deleting records on our Python Django backend. So we've already configured a lot for our backend. In this video, we are continuing that, and we're going to create forms on our front end so that we can submit the data that our database and backend is expecting. And in today's videos, we're going to cover 6 main topics. We're going to start by installing some packages which we will require for this video. Next, we're going to go to the Material UI documentation and we're going to copy over some of their form examples into our application. When it is done, we're going to making some changes to those forms so they can be used dynamically and they're parameterized and they're also ready for using React form hook. Next, we're going to do some work on our create.js file. We're going to create some nice boxes for our forms. And we're going to put our forms on that create.js page. And finally, we are going to create a submit button and submitting data from our forms into the console so we can check if everything works the way that we're expecting. So let's start with a brief explanation of how we're going to actually do this. To create the forms on our JS pages, we're going to be using components from Material UI. Because what I already explained in our previous videos, we can use components from Material UI to make our development much faster and use pre-built components instead of doing everything from the ground up. So we're going to go and use these components to make our life a little bit easier. To submit the forms, we're going to use something called React Hook Form. And React Hook Form is a performant and flexible, extensible form submitter with very easy to use validation. And you can see it if you scroll down. It means writing less code and having more performance. That is exactly what we're going to go for. So we're going to combine Material UI forms with using React Hook Form to submit our forms to our backend. But before we can do this, we need to do some installs. And for React Hook Form, we're going to go to Get Started and make sure that we have everything we need. And you can see on this page that all that we will need is npm install React Hook Form. So let's copy this statement and go to our code where we can put that in. So I'm going to open a new terminal and I'm going to cd into my front end folder because we are going to be doing the work in the front end. And then the first thing that I'm going to install is I'm going to do React Hook Form. Let's give it some time to install. All right, we seem to be all complete here. Next thing that you need to install, if you've not followed along with these tutorials before, you need to also install the MUI/material, emotion react, and emotion styled. We've already done this in a previous video, so I'm not going to do this. But if you're not following this tutorial, please make sure that these ones are also in there. And the last thing that we need to install is a few packages from Material UI to use a date and time picker. And I'm going to use the date picker later on, so it's very important that you have this as well. And to do that, I'm going to do npm install @material UI/x datepickers. So let's put that in our front end code right here. Give it some time. And the other command that I'm going to take is npm install day.js, because this is also something we will need to make the date picker work. So we're heading over to our front end again and put in npm install day.js. And I think that is the final package we will need to do everything that we want to do in this video. Next on our list is getting all of the different form components that we will need to create the forms in our front end. And I'm going to store those in my code right here. So I'm going to start off by going to components and I'm going to add a new folder called forms. And that's where I'm going to be storing all of the forms that we will require during this tutorial. Now, in our previous video, we've already set up our backend, and in our backend, we've defined a model. And in this model, you can see that we're expecting to provide a name, a start date, an end date, a comment, and a status. So ideally, what I would like to do inside of my forms is creating a text field so I can put in the name, put in a date picker for getting a start date and an end date, putting a text area field where we have a little bit more room to store all of the columns, and also have a select form that is able to store the status that we're going to give it. So let's go to Material UI and pick up form examples for these fields. And then we can put those inside of the forms folder that we've just created right here. So we're now back in the Material UI documentation, and the first thing that I want to get is a text field, because in the text field we can get our name of the project set up. And you can see right here that Material UI has an abundance of text fields you can pick. You can pick them outlined, filled, standard. You also have them ready with things being required or disabled, and these are all of the different things that you can do with these forms. But I'm just going to go to the top and I'm going to expand the code of these basic examples, and I'm going to just copy everything that is in here. Now back in our code, and I'm going to create a new file in the forms folder. I'm going to call it my text field.js, and in here I'm going to paste all of the code. Now I have different variances here of the same form, because as you also saw in the documentation, we have outlined, we have filled, and we have a standard one. Now I'm perfectly fine with just using the standard one, so that is going to be all that I need. And you can also see in the example on their side that there's a box around of these forms, but I don't really need that, so I'm going to delete that one as well inside. So I'm going to delete the box as well inside of my code, so we just have the text field remaining here. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to call this my text field instead of the name that it already had, and now we have all of the different things that we need. We can also remove this box thing because we are not going to need it right now. So that was the first one. Let's now look for a text field which leaves a little bit more room to place comments. So we're back again in the Material UI documentation, and if you scroll further down on the text field, you can see that there's also the possibility to have a multi-line field. And what this does is you can go in there and you can go down, and it will go on and on and on. And this is ideal for placing comments. So I'm looking to pick up this multi-line one right here, which is the last one specified in the code. So I'm again going to show the code. I'm going to copy all of them, and I'm just going to keep the last one there. So back in our code, and I'm going to again create a new file and call it my multi-line field.js. And I'm going to paste in the entire code. And what I just already explained, I'm only after the last one here. So I'm just going to delete everything that goes on top here, also the box, and also delete the div and the box right here. So all that we're left with is our text field right here. And again, I'm going to remove box from the top, and I'm going to call it my multi-line field. I'm going to save that. And this is actually good for now. And on the documentation, we've now moved to select, because I also want to have a select field that we're going to be using for our status field. And here you have a basic select one, which is outlined, where you have a number of options. And on the bottom here, I have more examples, which have, for example, here field and standard variants. And I'm just going to pick up this one on the left. So I'm going to show the code for this one, and I'm just going to copy it all. Beware, I need to put this on JS instead of TypeScript, because I'm using JavaScript instead of TypeScript. And I'm going to copy everything, go back to my code, create a new file called my select field.js. And in there, I'm just going to paste everything. And the only thing that I want is the bottom part. So I'm just going to delete everything within form control right here. And that should do the trick for us. And again, I'm going to rename this function to say my select field instead of what it was before. And let's save it right there. Last thing that we're going to be doing is getting a date picker. And for that, you need to go to Material UI X and then to React date pickers. And over here, you can see that we have a number of date components, and we have something called a date picker. So I'm going to go there, and here we have the basic date picker where we can just select something and get the date that we would like. And if you scroll further to the bottom, you have some other examples right here. But what I'm looking for is just the one as the basic example. So again, expanding the code, going to JavaScript on the left hand side and copying this entire code. Back to our code, again, repetitive process. We're going to say my date picker field.js, and I'm just going to paste in everything from this date picker and call it my date picker field and save it. And now we're all done with the fields that we will need for our project. And now it is time to make some changes to our form code because I want to do two things. First of all, I want to make these fields reusable. So for example, this text field right now, it has a hard-coded label, a hard-coded everything, but I want to reuse this for multiple forms. So we're going to add some parameters so we can parameterize our forms. The next thing we need to take into account is that when we use React Hook forms, we need to make sure that React Hook Forms works together with Material UI. Because Material UI is known as something called a controlled input. To enable React Hook Form to work with it, we need to make some changes to our forms and we need to add a wrapper component called controller so that everything with our form handling goes well. And I'm going to show you exactly how you need to make changes to these forms to make it work. Let's start by parameterizing our text field right here so that it does not display the label as a standard, but that we can also change the name based on the parameters. So on top, I'm going to say constant and then squarely brackets, and I'm going to start by just including label, and that's going to be equal to props. And then in the text field, I'm going to keep the ID as standard basic, and I'm going to change the label to have a name called label. Then I'm going to pass in the props into my text field right here. And what this does, it makes sure that we can pass in the name of the label later on in our create.js field. We don't need to hard code as specified right now. And now we can use this one form multiple times in our code. And in my text field, I'm actually also going to add another parameter, and I'm going to add placeholder. And this is going to make sure that we have a placeholder text in our forms. And I'm going to parameterize that to placeholder so we can determine that later on as well. And next to label, I'm also going to pass placeholder in as a prop so we can fill that in later. To make this text field usable for React Hook Form, we need to use the controller component, and that's going to take care of all of the challenges that we're going to have with integrating controlled components. The first thing we need to do to realize that is import the controller. So we'd say import controller from React Hook Form. And then we're going to wrap our entire text field around the controller. So I'm going to open the controller component like so, and I'm going to close it right here afterwards. And this text field is going to be included in a parameter of the controller called render. So I'm going to state render, and that is going to be equal to squarely brackets, round brackets, and then again squarely brackets, opening it up like so. And after the squarely brackets, we're going to open it up, and I'm going to add an arrow function and open two brackets like this. And I'm going to copy my entire text field like this and put it inside of these round brackets like so, because it's a function inside of our render. And now also all of the red things are red, so it's a little bit easier to read. And within this render, I'm going to add a few parameters. First thing I'm going to specify into render is a field. A field is going to be equal to onChange and value. This is going to take care of the onChange parameter that you usually have in your text field and the value one. Next thing that we're going to add is field state. And field state is going to be equal to error because it's going to do some error handling. And the last thing that we're going to define here is the form state. And we're not going to specify anything for that right now. It's just going to be there because that's also a generic example. And we can add a comma right here. Now, this is one of the parameters that we need to specify in our controller, but there are two more on the top. So the first thing that we need to specify is the name. And name is actually going to be equal in this case to name. And in the end, this value is going to be equal to the the attribute name. So for example, the label that you see right here, this is going to be the title as in the form, but the name is actually going to be the name of the field that we want to fill. And the second thing that we need to define is control, and control is going to be equal to control. And don't worry too much about this control one. This is just going to take care and make sure that everything with that controlled component is going to go nicely. And now we need to also pass these variables to our props, because we need to take these into the place where we're actually going to use these forms. So on the top here, I'm going to add name, and I'm going to add control. This is all that we need to bring there. And now I'm going to save. Now actually for my multi-line field, it's going to be exactly the same, because here we're also utilizing a text field. So what I'm going to do is I'm again going on the top, I'm going to import the controller from React Hook form, but then I'm just going to copy the entire render that I have in my text field, including the constant. Well, actually, I'm just going to copy the entire function that we have right now, because that's just going to be much more convenient. And in my multi-line field, I'm just going to paste it on top. I'm just going to copy the text field, just put it next to it for reference, like so. And the only things that I want to change here, I want to take the label from here and make sure that this label is also dynamic. And I want to add a placeholder right here, so that we also have that in here. And then I can just delete the old text field and it will be fine. And the second thing that I also want to keep is the name of this. So it's still going to be called my multi-line form. And by doing it this way, we're also done for the multi-line field, because that's exactly the same thing as what we're doing right here. Now this is actually going to be a little bit boring, because before the date picker field, we're going to do something very similar. So I'm just from the top here, I'm going to import the import of the controller, and into my date picker field, I'm going to add that one here as well. And we're going to do the same thing for our date picker. I'm just going to remove the demo container, because we actually don't need it, I think. And on top right here, underneath the localization provider, because that needs to be on top, we're going to identify the controller component. But same here, I'm just going to copy the entire controller we have right here in my text field. I'm going to go to my date picker field, and under the localization, I'm going to paste that in. But I'm going to replace my text field in here with what is my date picker. There we go. And actually, there are a few things in here that we don't need, because the field state and the form state, I don't need those for my date picker. So that's going to be fine. And what I also want right here is I want to make this label dynamic, because I'm going to use this for my start date and my end date. So I'm going to define label as label. And now I just need to do the same thing as before, where I define a constant that says label on change and value, and also control and name. Actually, on change and value is not even needed. I just did define label, control, and name, and label it as props. And then we're going to pass in the props on the top, like so. And then we are actually done for our date picker as well. And for our select field, I'm going to do a very similar thing. So I'm going to copy the import for controller and also place it in my text field on the top here, because it's important to have those ready. And I'm also going to wrap this entire thing with the controller component. So I'm just going to copy my controller again, including the text field for now. I'm going to go to my select field, and I'm going to wrap that around after the form control. There we go, putting in the controller. And I'm just going to copy the input label that we have, because I don't think we'll actually need that. We're going to put that underneath the form control as it was. And then I'm going to take the entire select statement we have, and I'm going to cut that and replace our text field with the input for the select field. I'm going to fix those indentations so it looks a little bit nicer, like so. And I am just going to make a change here because we need to make sure that now the label is right here as a constant. We still have the name and the control, and we of course need to add those to the props. So I'm going to, similar to this before, I'm actually going to copy it from the text field on the top here, constant label placeholder name and props. And for the select field, I'm going to say that as well, but I don't need the placeholder in this case, so that one's going to go. And I'm going to pass the props into my select field. And this should do everything that I want to do. So now our forms are all ready, and now it's time to make changes to our create.js file, because on this create page I actually want to display all of those forms and let the user create records. So I'm going to start by starting our server using npm start, because then we can check out what is going to be happening right here. And one of the first things that I want to do is I want to create a nice layout for my forms in there. So I'm going to start by importing box from Material UI. I've already done the install for that. And I'm going to create some kind of a top bar right here. So yeah, that the user knows what's actually going on this page. So I'm going to say box, like so. And then we're going to style this box. So I'm going to define SX because that's the styling element. So we can kind of do a CSS-like style into our box. And I'm going to add a few things. So the first thing that I will add is display is going to be equal to flex, because that's going to make things a little bit more responsive. Next, I'm going to state that the width of this bar is going to be 100%, because I want it to span the entire width of the area that we can work with. Next, I'm going to give it a background color. And that background color is going to be equal to some kind of a dark grayish. And that's going to be color code 0003F, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm also going to add a little bit of a margin on the bottom, because I don't want the content after it to be yeah, exactly right below it, but I want a little bit of space. Now inside of this box, I just want to add a typography from Material UI, and it also adds that automatically. And I'm going to state here create records as the title. And in here again, I'm going to add a little bit of styling to make it look a little bit better. And I'm going to state a margin left of 20px. So it's not pushed all the way to the left, but we have a little bit of room there. And I want the text color to be white. So I'm going to say that color is going to be equal to dash FFFFF, because that should be kind of a whitish color. Okay, so small change. I needed to add an additional 0, I think, yes, to my color here. And this can be 3 Fs. And now let's take a look at what our result looks like. So we are back in our code right now. You can see that we have a very basic top bar at the top now that states that we can create records inside of our application. And for now, this is going to be enough for us. We can, of course, make it a little bit nicer, but for now, that is sufficient. What I also want is I want to create a box here that's going to hold my forms correctly. So let's do that next. Now, what I want to create is I want to have one box as kind of the top box right here. And then in these boxes, I'm going to have 2 separate boxes where my forms are going to be in. And this does not look good, so give me a second to make this look a little bit better. So we are going to be having one box with here, another box and another box, and each of these boxes is going to have like 3 forms in here and probably around 3 forms in there. So let's first add some styling for that top box, and I'm just going to copy everything I have and make a small change. So this top box is going to indeed have display flex and a width of 100. I don't want it to have a background color like so, but I do want it to have a box shadow. And I'm going to set that box shadow to 3, because that's going to automatically generate some kind of a box shadow for us. The last thing that I also want to add instead of a margin bottom is a padding. And I'm going to set the padding to 4. Okay, so now we have this, but I also need to add one last thing, and that is flex direction. And I'm going to set that to column because I want these things to be underneath each other instead of next to each other. And now when we go to our output, you can see that we have a box with kind of a shadow around it, and we have our two form areas underneath each other. And now we need to make sure that we place our forms in there and that it looks nice. So first thing that I will do on the top is I'm going to import all of my forms because otherwise I cannot use them. So I'm going to say import my date picker field. I'm going to say import my text field. I'm going to say also import my select field. And as the last one, import my multi-line field. Okay. And the next thing that I will be doing is I'm going to create 3 forms inside of the first box and 3 forms inside of the last box. So you remember from our models.py that one of the first fields that we need is name. And name is going to be inside of a text field. So I'm just going to add a new block here. And I'm going to call that my text field, like so. And as you remember from my text field that we just created, go to our forms, it needs a few input parameters. So it needs a label, a placeholder, a name, and it needs control. So I'm going to go to my create.js page, and inside of my text field here, I'm going to define those. So the label is going to be equal to name, and this is the text that we'll see as the title of my form. The name needs to be a technical attribute, and in the end that is going to be name but with lowercase because that's what we call it in our database. We will have control, and that is going to be equal to control. And as the last thing, we also need a placeholder, and that is the text that is going to be there. And I can say provide a project name. Let's see what this looks like. And the error that we are receiving is that control is not defined. And that can be correct because we have not defined all of the stuff we need from React Hook Forms yet. So let's start by setting that up. So we're going to do one additional import right here. And we're going to import use form from React Hook Form. The next thing what we need to do is we need to define a constant that's going to use the use form. So in create on the top here, I'm going to define a constant, curly brackets, and in there we need to specify a few items that in the end are going to be equal to the use form. And the things that we're going to specify in the constant is first of all, handle submit. We need reset, set value. And we're also going to require control. And this is the component that we were actually missing. And one of the few changes we need to make is use form actually needs to be in between brackets. And like this, it should be fine. So if we now check our application, you can see that we have a form called name. And when we click on it, it provides the placeholder called provide a project name. So our form is now rendering fine by using use form. So let's create our other forms as well so that we are complete in what we want to submit in the end. So you know that we started by a name. And the additional things that we're also going to need is we're going to use a start date and an end date of the project. So let's define these right here. And we're going to do that for my date picker field. And underneath my text field, I'm going to specify that as a block, my date picker field, like so. And in here, we also need to specify a few parameters. So I'm just going to copy these 3 right here, because those are also exactly the ones that we will need. We're going to provide a name, which is going to be start date. And the name in here is going to be a start date with an underscore, because that's going to be a technical name. And we define control as control. And now I'm going to copy the same form name right here, and I'm going to utilize that to also provide the end date. So all we need to do is change the label to end date and also change the name to end date. And this should do the trick for us. So we're now back in our form, and you can see that we have these date pickers now for start date and for end date. And when we click this calendar thing, you can see that it populates the information that we require. But right now, I don't really like the formatting we have going on here. I noticed two things. First, these forms are not the same width. And second, they're distributed a little bit, in not such a nice way. So let's change that right now. And to do that, we're going to go to our box. And I'm just going to copy the styling from the box above. And I'm just going to delete everything right here. And I need to specify the justify content. And I'm going to set that to space around. And if we save it and we go back to our code, you will see that there's now space around of these forms instead of them being very, very close to each other. So that's nice. But this still has not fixed our width issue. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to go to each of my forms and I'm going to add a styling component on the form and add a width component to that so we can change that dynamically. I'm going to go into text field and state SX and again have the double brackets, and I'm going to say that width is going to be equal to width. And I'm going to place width on the top right here so we can pass in the width for my create.js page. And now I'm just going to copy this same one for my date picker. And we're going to do exactly the same. I'm going to put in width right there. And I'm going to put width as a prop so I can pass that in on my create.js file. And multi-line also copying the width one right here. And also specify width as a parameter like so. And for the select field, we're going to do the same thing. However, right here, you can see that it is already specifying a margin and this kind of thing. So I'm just going to delete that and put it in the form control on the top. And also put the constants right here as width. And now in my create.js file, I can specify another parameter where I define the width of my form. And I can say 20%, or let's increase it a little bit and say it's going to be 30%. Let's do the same for my date picker fields and save that. And you can now see that it's evenly divided over my box right here. So that's going to go quite nicely. Now, of course, these are not all of the fields that I need. I also need my select field and my multi-line field to administrate my comments and my status. So let's do that right now. So back in our code, and our second box, as you can see, is still empty. But for the sake of convenience, I do not want to put in all of the styling again. So I'm just going to copy my first box with all of those nice styling elements right there. And I am going to say that that's fine like so. Okay. To make this a little bit easier for us, I'm going to just change my text field to my multi-line field. And we're going to put in comments as the name right here. And also say comments here. Control is still control. Placeholder is provide project comments. And the width is also going to be 30%. Now the next one is going to be my select field. So I'm going to say my select field. Label here is going to say status. And the technical name is also going to be status. Control is again going to be equal to control, and the width is also 30%. And lastly, if I just delete this field, it's going to look really weird because it's going to do space around and it's going to be in the middle of the screen. So for the sake of simplicity and convenience for me, I'm just going to define a div or maybe even a box. So it's going to make it a little bit easier. And I'm just going to say that SX is going to be equal to a width of 30%. So this is just going to be a placeholder that specifies nothing, just to make sure that my forms align. Okay, and one more thing that we need to change in my select field is you just need to delete this div on the top and the div on the bottom, because that's going to influence the width that you will see on the screen. And by saving it like this, that should be totally fine, provided that we have the width here and the width there. And the same for the multi-line field. Make sure that the width is there and that is defined like this. Okay, so let's see what it looks like in our server right now. And you can see that we have the comments right here with already a default value and also a status. And the status provides us with these options. Now, a few things that I want to change. I want to remove this default value because I don't really need it at this point. And also want to make sure that the status one provides the options that I would like to see and that it's not filled. So let's make those changes. So back in my multi-line field here, and we see default value specified, and I'm just going to delete that so that it's done. And in my select field, I'm going to change these options to reflect project statuses. I'm going to say open, in progress, and completed. Those are the records that I'm going to be logging. You can also do this in using a model where you define options and you get the options into your front end, but I'm just going to hard code it for now. Now, the other thing that I want is, I think I copied over the wrong example. I copied over the field example whilst I wanted to have the other example. So let's see how we can change that. And all that we actually need to do is we need to change field to standard like so. The last thing that I want to change here is I want to have some distance between my top form and my bottom form because it's very close to each other. To this first box of the first forms, I'm going to add a margin bottom. I'm going to set that to 40 pixels, so we have a little bit of space between the first three forms and the second three forms. And when we go back now, you can see that we have then a nice bottom here, and with a status and comments and a name. All right. Now, really the last change that I want to make is I'm going to set the multi-line fields by default to one row and see what it looks like. And now it's on the same level as my comments. And if I want to have a longer story, I can just adjust that accordingly. But I just like that a little bit better. And my form page is ready for now. And to actually see the output of our work, I want to display this information when we submit a form in our console. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to wrap my entire code that I have inside of these form tags, because of course we are submitting a form. And then in this form, I need to add a onSubmit clause. And that is going to be equal to onSubmit. And there I'm going to refer to handle submit. And when we handle the submit, I want to do something called submission. But submission is something that we still need to define. So I'm going to define my constant called submission. And that is going to be equal to data and then an arrow function. That is going to do a console.log of the data. And now when we submit it, it's going to log the data from our forms in our console. The thing is, nothing is triggering this submission yet because we just say, if there is a submit, then console log the data. We actually need a submit button that is going to do that for us. So in my remaining box here with a width of 30%, I'm going to specify button. And that is going to automatically also put the button as an import right here. You can see it that it has a button from MUI/material. And in that button, I'm going to say the text is going to be equal to submit. Our button variant, I'm going to set to contained because that is going to make it look very nice. And the type of the button is going to be equal to submit. And by naming it submit, our onSubmit will know that it should trigger this handle submit function, which will then log the data. And the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say styling, and I'm just going to set the width of my button to 100% for now. Might not going to be look the best, but for now that is what I'm going to do. And now when we are back in our code, you can see that we have our form and we have a very big submit button next to it. So let's check what happens when I submit a record. And it turns out I actually made a little bit of a mistake right here, because inside of our forms we also need to specify the onChange to be equal to onChange, and we need to specify value as value. Otherwise, it is not going to be read. And I'm going to copy this as well for the select field. And I'm also going to do it for the multi-align field right here. And last but not least, we also have our date picker field. And the last thing that we're also going to change in my select field is we're going to set these values right here also to the text that we're going to see inside of these text values, because I don't want to pass 20 to my backend. I want to pass in progress to my backend. Same here, I want to have completed. In project, I'm going to say project 1. Start date is going to be on today. End date is going to be later. And the comments, I will just say comment. Status, I'm going to pick in progress. And let's see what happens if I click on submit. Well, when I submit it, I get the name of project 1, a start date of actually a very big range of different dates. It actually specifies a lot of different things, and a status of in progress. So it seems to be working just fine. And this is actually everything that we're going to be doing for this video. So in this video, I've showed you how you can use components from Material UI as forms inside of your JavaScript file. And I also showed you how you can use React Hook forms to, in the end, submit content to your console. In the next video, we're going to go even further, and we're going to be actually submitting this data to our backend and making sure that it's going to be in our database. And we're also going to create pages that work very similarly, but are going to enable us to edit this data and display this data to make our CRUD functionality complete. Thank you very much for watching this video. I know it's been a little bit of a big one. Please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this content, and let me know what I should do next. And for now, I would say bye-bye.